Let me start by saying the only 3 pieces of media that can correctly predict exactly where Deltarune is going are Mother 3, Link's Awakening, and Board James. Watch Bucket Theory after this, it's the best Deltarune video on YouTube. However, in observing a thematic connection Deltarune as a whole had to Kirby's adventure, I realized that a huge amount of the story and identity of a specific character, the knight, obviously, can actually be traced back to this game and this series. Deltarune, Undertale, Link's Awakening, and Kirby franchise full game spoilers ahead. Subsection A, Nightmare Knight. The most essential thing to understand immediately is my idea of exactly what the knight is. It is my belief that the knight is made out of nightmares, due to the significance of dreams, the very death-shaped voice in the code comparing the space she is in to a specific nightmare she had, the ties between ERAM, deaths, and nightmares, and the fact that a nightmare is the opposite of a lost dream, and the black shards are in fact the opposite of shadow crystals. Basically, you want a lost dream to come true, but it can't, and you want a nightmare to stop, but you always have nightmares. Shadow crystals are transparent and don't seem very useful, and black shards are opaque and extremely useful. Watch my Twisted Purification theory for more details. Now let's talk about what the knight specifically has to do with Nightmare from Kirby's Adventure. We all know that ERAM is analogous to the nightmares from Link's Awakening. The number of ties to that game are enormous. However, despite the fact that I really think that ERAM is the embodiment of nightmares, I actually think that the knight seems to have been influenced and taken after Nightmare from Kirby's Adventure, a game that explores similar themes. I know this is an immediately odd thing to say because I literally just said Link's Awakening is so relevant to Deltarune. But after making a surface-level connection about how Nightmare's banishment in Kirby's Adventure led to all dreams disappearing, and how similar that is to the balance of light and dark in Deltarune, and how well that would line up with my existing thoughts on the knight and therefore Dess's eventual death when their nightmare ends, somebody left a comment on my video that made me realize that the connections were so much deeper than I had initially thought. Just to point out some obvious similarities between the characters, Nightmare can shapeshift into a ball, just like the knight. Nightmare uses stars to attack, just like the knight. Nightmare shows up after what you think is the final boss and steals the spotlight, just like the knight. Nightmare uses after-image effects and specifically glitches out upon defeat, just like the knight. Nightmare is temporarily staved off by sealing the Fountain of Dreams, just like the roaring goddamn knight. I know that these are all superficial connections, but when all taken together, I actually would be shocked if this wasn't at least somewhat intentional, especially because there are a lot of other ties to the Kirby series that I will talk about in a bit. Additionally, Toby Fox has posted a remix of a song from Kirby's Adventure and cites it as a must-listen all-time great video game soundtrack, plus having pointed out that one of his own enemy designs greatly resembles an enemy from Kirby. Oh, and the song that the knight's motif is from is called Nightmare Knight and uses samples mostly from Kirby's Dreamland 3. And it's like, yeah, that's not the same Kirby game, but if you have the word nightmare in a song that is crawling with Kirby sounds, it's certainly because the idea of nightmares is inherently tied to Nightmare from Kirby's Adventure in your mind. It isn't a random choice. The thing is, no matter how you slice it, the Kirby franchise is integral to the knight's identity within Toby's mind. And it's always been sort of a mission statement for Toby to expand on underexplored and interesting narrative and gameplay ideas present in older games. Having this badass aura farmer, dark/star elemental shape-shifting guy that is intrinsically tied to nightmares in a game about the balance of negative and positive forces is super cool, but Kirby's Adventure doesn't really explore it all that much. The fact that Kirby's Adventure is centrally based on a fountain of dreams, which the Dark Worlds are repeatedly described as dreams and are made of fountains, with those two words being, used directly in the same sentence or one sentence apart and in order to refer to the same thing in literally dozens of instances, also strikes me as extremely suspect. This is exacerbated even more when you take into account the fact that the Fountain of Dreams is actually arguably the most iconic stage from Super Smash Bros. Melee. That or Yoshi's Story, which watch Browse as a Mushroom Theory for my read on Yoshi. Super Smash Bros. Melee is referenced repeatedly in Deltarune, and Toby Fox used to be a literal competitive Melee player. Okay, guys, short aside, I actually found Toby's one and only recorded match from his days playing Smash competitively, and for some reason, the main interaction that Toby just gets destroyed on repeatedly is his recovery getting punished by Samus, which, by the way, not to harp on it too much, but this is like a very favorable matchup for him. It's whatever, which is actually so interesting because in Chapter 5, Yellow says bouncing is too laggy to punish anything, and every time he bounces up, he gets shot with a gun. If any competitive Smash players know more about this, I'm sure this is like a much more general reference to Melee, but it's really funny to think that it's specifically about that time that Toby lost a winning matchup against a really good Samus player. Back to the main point though. So why does it matter if the night is similar to Nightmare from Kirby's Adventure? Well, the way I see it, unlike in Kirby, the solution for getting rid of nightmares won't be such a strange narrative choice as just killing them. Or seemingly strange. I actually think that Kirby is being deceptively thoughtful with its handling of this. The thing to me is that the narrative of Kirby's Adventure sees DDD seal all nightmares and dreams away so that people don't have to have nightmares. But then Kirby destroys a nightmare and suddenly everything seems fine. I actually believe that the game was getting at something different than what it seems like at a surface level though. DDD is a selfish king who stole all the food in Dreamland in the first game. He isn't really sealing the fountain to end all nightmares. Nightmare isn't all nightmares. Nightmare is DDD's nightmare. The final boss is Kirby forcing DDD to confront his fears and helping him break through them. There will still be more nightmares in Dreamland, as we see in later games. Kirby's Adventure is a game about facing your fears and accepting that, with good, you must also have bad. The difference in Deltarune is that I believe the character of ERAM is essentially the nightmare concept from Link's Awakening, which are representative of every nightmare that the Windfish, a deity that presides over dreams and creates through dreams, has. Destroying the nightmares destroys the dream world, which was a real world, to be clear. Nightmares in Zelda and Nightmares in Kirby explore a totally different kind of balance in regards to dreams. And it is my opinion that Deltarune is pulling from both, and combining these two great narrative ideas from old but excellent games into one powerful thematic core. If you've seen Twisted Purification Theory, you know that I think the Twisted route in Chapter 6 will end in killing ERAM, who is the embodiment of nightmares, but that doing so will also kill Des completely. I go into it more in the actual video, but the reason we kill ERAM is because we believe we can free Des from the nightmare that has made her become the Night, free her from the darkness of her own mind. But that darkness is essential. The only way to defeat it is to console it, to face it, to work to change it. Destroying the source will only destroy the whole person. And we've seen examples of this in Deltarune before. Damaging the soul damages our whole party. Sealing the fountain causes the whole dream to end. Even something simple like sparing the task manager spares all tasks. But I'd really like to highlight that fountain thing. If fountains are dreams, and then there's a source of nightmares, like I think ERAM probably is, due to all the nightmare stuff going on, then I think it stands to reason that destroying ERAM is destroying all nightmares, and that the night is just one of those nightmares. Breaking any bonds breaks our bond with the whole world. This game has set up the idea of destroying a significant part of something, making the entire thing unsalvageable, especially with Tenna and Jackenstein if you don't get all recruits. I believe that the Night is a much more narratively tricky version of this, combining ideas from Link's Awakening and Kirby's Adventure. I guess some people might be shouting that I'm so stupid because Toby would clearly have had more explicit references to Kirby if this was the case. There's at least 3 or 4 Mario references since Mario has thematic relevance. I thought I was at a hard wall here, but I went on WikiKirby and also saw a year-old Reddit thread that pointed out some of the stuff I've been saying, so that was validating, to see if I needed to throw my theory away. And I found some eye-opening things that made me realize even more subtle connections not listed on the site, and brought me to a different and more interesting conclusion. Let's talk about the Kirby references and connections in Deltarune first, though. Subsection B. Toby loves Kirby so much. So my observations about the references I could think of are definitely a lot weaker on their own, but WikiKirby has this to say about the connections that are very much absolutely deliberate. In Chapter 2, Spampton Neo has an attack where his face appears up close, and his eyes, nose, and mouth shoot different projectiles. His mouth shoots air bullets like Wispy Woods. In Chapter 2, the Task Manager Says challenge at the Party Dojo has several similarities with the sub-games of Kirby's Dreamland 3, including the red shapes above characters' head when succeeding in the minigame, using knots and crosses appearing below the characters as a scoring system, and having similar sound effects and facial expressions on the characters when succeeding and failing during the minigames. In Chapter 3, during one of Tenna's quizzes, a question is asked about what Azrael's favorite character in Smashing Fighters is, an obvious nod to the Super Smash Bros. Series. One of the possible responses to this question is Big Penguin, likely referring to King Dedede. In Chapter 5, one of the sprites for Orange's shadow puppet resembles Shadow Bite. I feel extremely stupid for missing this one, because I'm like the Kirby fan. There's other Kirby fans, don't get me wrong, but I really like Kirby. In addition to these references, I have a few observations, like Queen's hands and pose on screen in the Giga Queen form is extremely reminiscent of Wham Bam Rock from Kirby Superstar. Having all of your friendships come together to make a final friendship weapon for fighting the final boss, like what happens in Chapter 2, is literally exactly what happens in Kirby's Dreamland 3. I know there's quite a lot of Kirby's Dreamland 3 in Chapter 2 specifically. Maybe it's because of all the Splendid Land, I'm not entirely sure. Even the cat petter's cats, you could argue being made entirely out of circles, isn't that dissimilar to Dark Matter. That's kind of a stretch, but I'll get back to Dark Matter later. This next one is maybe a stretch as well, but also possibly not given Toby's history with Smash. You decide. I think you could argue that the shape-shifting costume acts are similar to copy abilities from Kirby, and especially from Super Smash Bros., as they grant specific situational powers based on abilities of the enemy, and are a twist on the established genre of game this is in. I think this is reinforced by Chris being able to shapeshift into Aqua in Chapter 5, as well as Aqua asking Chris to copy her abilities. Also, while minigames were largely invented by Super Mario Bros. 3, the kind of minigames we see in Deltarune are extremely reminiscent of Kirby minigames in just this inexplicable vibes way. All I can really do is show you these next to each other. There's nothing specific here, it just seems like a connection to me for whatever reason. I guess I can say that this section of Chapter 5 feels extremely similar to this Amazing Mirror minigame. And we'll get back to you, Amazing Mirror. Also, Rowser is called a fluffy prince at his level 1 power status, and there's a character in Kirby named Prince Fluff. Just thought I'd share this information. And by the way, Fluffy Prince is only for if you have the Dainty Scarf equipped. Plus, yeah, the pink coins very much remind me of Celeste's strawberries, but Kirby does the whole locking a boss that is usually entirely mechanically different from the stuff you do to get to the boss behind a bunch of collectibles bullshit like every other game. Not a complaint, by the way, it's just total bullshit. I hope I've made it clear that the precedent for Kirby being directly relevant to lore-important characters in Deltarune is totally set in the same way as something like Mario or Smash or Mother 3, not necessarily to the in-your-face gratuitous extent of Link's Awakening, where 2 entire chapters' gameplay is extremely inspired by it to a shameless extent that super strongly suggests huge connections, but still to a great extent. Now let's run with that, with some patterns I have noticed that might give us another piece of the Deltarune puzzle. Subsection C, Soul Bosses and Dark Matter. So in the Kirby series, there are several super bosses known as Soul Bosses. For the sake of argument, I would like to point out some common threads between these Soul Bosses and the bosses that change our Soul mode in Deltarune, because I just think that's neat. One common thread is that all of both are subscribed to Willow pngtuber and liked the video. The other is that they're very badass and cool. They also have a really valuable thought they'd like to add in the comments. They're also all YouTube members on the $4 tier and get to personally request an entire video for me to make each month, or at least on the $1 tier for a podcast every Sunday. Wow, they're so cool. And I guess that's all you have to do to become a secret boss and change somebody's soul mode. What do you know? Anyways, the first real soul boss, because Josh's soul isn't a super boss even though she established some patterns, is Mark's soul. Mark's soul is a reborn version of an existing villainous and goofy character from Kirby Superstar, who has a ton of similarities to Jevil, and was almost certainly an inspiration for him because Canotines has posted Kirby fan art. But we have to compare him to Spampton Neo. So then both of them are a powered-up form of a goofy little guy with huge multicolored wings and heavy uses of the colors pink and yellow, and notable bomb attacks, plus establishing attack patterns that become commonplace. And all of that while also shooting lasers out of their mouth. Spampton Neo is also notable for having an explicit Kirby reference during the fight. Additionally, immediately before the normal Marks fight, we play a shoot-'em-up section, and apparently, I just found this out now, but Spampton Neo has an attack that went unused that is based on said shoot-'em-up section directly, which is so interesting. Comparing Magolor to Gerson is a little bit harder. They're both our friends throughout the adventure, with their home base serving as our base of operations, but Magolor is an evil guy that betrays us, while Gerson is a kind and good person. They do have similarities in the orchestral sound of their battle themes and whatnot, but I definitely think this connection is relatively weak compared to the other three. One could argue that the star attacks and stuff make a connection, or that Gerson being so probable to find and Magolor's soul being mandatory on the game's hard mode are connections, but I'm not really sure doing that would be productive. These next two are very interesting though. Sectonia Soul is a literal flower that flies at you and is the ruler of a flower kingdom and is essentially benevolent but did bad things as a result of corruption by love. I don't know, I think that's a plausible connection. And like, Flowery having been somewhat influenced by the game where you use giant rainbow sucking powers seems so bitingly plausible that it hurts. Pink being Stardream Soul OS, well, a ghost possessing a sentient robot with voice clips and all and having heavy heart and cat theming throughout, plus being the best boss in the game. Well, Planet Robobot came out in 2016, so there's no way that this was on purpose, but the comparison is still present, and I think that's really neat. Now, what I actually think is extremely likely is that Toby has taken influence from the dark matter concept from Kirby. Basically, dark matter is a negative manifestation of something called void that can best be explained as the essence of dreams. Doesn't matter, that game is super new. Dark matter in the Dreamland trilogy is basically the follow-up to Nightmare. Evil force that possesses people and makes them shapeshift in grotesque, scary ways that can also manifest as a friend who helps you out. If you want to know my detailed thoughts on what friend is, check out Imaginary Friend Theory, as it lays it all out better than I possibly could within the scope of this video. It reminds me a lot of the darkness in Deltarune, especially with how it just shows up over and over and quite literally covers the world in darkness in some games. The idea of the dark worlds being basically dark matter, as in the scientific concept, is not only not new, but almost certainly partially the intention. And given the Kirby references present throughout the game, especially to Dreamland 3, and just how perfect an influence the friendship game where you win by making the love stick would be for Deltarune, I'm so compelled by the idea of dark matter from Kirby being somewhat influential here. The kind of ultimate embodiment of this dark matter is this thing called 02, which is a literal giant eyeball angel. Well, it's not as if he's defeated by a prince and a human and a girl, and okay, actually, we don't have a prince. We have a king and a king's advisor. Okay, thank goodness. But still, this is very much an angel which shares visual motifs with the Titans. In fact, in general, darkened eyes is totally something that one could refer to the dark matter mooks as. These things that are literally big black blobs with a huge eyeball on them. The opening areas of some dark worlds and the eye motifs with the Titan totally tie this together. Fountains shaping from darkened eyes could totally be the dark worlds forming out of a very similar type of dark matter, which spawns from the blood of the angel. An angel which can be reborn and be a different individual while still inhabiting the same body and having the same appearance. What I haven't told you is that 02 is a reincarnation of the first ultimate embodiment of dark matter, which is called Zero. This reincarnation was achieved by implanting a different consciousness into the hollowed-out body of Zero after we killed the red thing in the center by using a heart-shaped object. And yes, this is a real thing in a Kirby game. If you've never played Kirby, you're probably a little astonished. New Kirby games are gory too, it's not just the old ones. But yeah. I think 0 and 02 from Kirby, with 0 having been the original incarnation of the angel character in Kirby, are similar to Noelle and the player. I think that on a normal route, where we go through loving everyone and making friends like Kirby's Dreamland 3, we will see Noelle become an angel and have to defeat her and her army of darkened eyes. But if we instead make like a Kirby 64 the crystal shards and go around collecting shadow crystals, some weird meta shit is going to happen with the player angel, and I just know it. I actually think that this could be a really compelling way for the twisted route specifically to pan out. I have a much more detailed theory about the angel and the prophecy and how it relates to Undertale in the works, but I definitely think that the fact that the source of the fountains and the idea of heaven are possibly tied to dark matter from Kirby informs how we could view the angel as either being Noelle or the player. That being by taking Noelle's body in certain routes. Subsection D. Putting it together. When you combine all of this, you have nightmares and dreams that are made up of dark matter, which can manifest as either friend or foe. You have a character who is nightmares as a whole, whose death means the destruction of all dreams, and thereby of deaths and maybe even dark worlds in totality. You have a character who is instead the nightmare of just deaths and individually embodies her will, a concept of balance within a world that is already a part of a delicate balance between light and dark. Further narrative exploration of an idea that was only skimmed by these old Nintendo games. Now, if only there were a character who had to do with dreams and mental illusions, could be described as the shadow at the backside of your mind and greatly resembled both nightmare and dark matter. Shucks, said for corn reasons. Okay, somebody's mind is about to be blown. Probably mine. The main villain of Kirby and the Amazing Mirror is this guy, Dark Mind. Kind of the natural crossover of nightmare and dark matter. This guy's true form is very reminiscent of Zero, leading some to speculate that he's some sort of 0-3. Either way, he traps you in this weird loop of fighting him over and over with his weird brain illusion magic, which you're seeing right now, me fighting him over and over. It actually reminds me a little bit of the multiple crumbling tower sections with the Titan in Chapter 4. He also shoots out lasers and has like a really badass battle theme, and is noted to create dark versions of characters. This is kind of an insane part of this whole thing, and I want you to bear with me. In the same way that Nightmare is Didity's nightmare, one could consider Dark Mind to be the darkness of Meta Knight's mind. Dark Mind is responsible for creating Dark Meta Knight after Meta Knight went to the Mirror World in order to stop Dark Mind from conquering it, with Dark Meta Knight being an arguably more powerful but mostly identical version of Meta Knight. Now, Chris is a Blue Knight character. The Knight is an all-black Knight character with a ton of connections to Chris. If you know my previous theories, you know that I think the Knight is a result of a deal with ERAM to let Des escape from the pain of her unfulfilled dreams, but the result was instead trapping her within her nightmares. What if the reason Chris feels accountable for that is that in order to mobilize Des's will through her nightmares, part of Chris was used as well, the darkest part of their mind, turned into a reflection of shared traits that makes worlds from the same part of the mind. Des and Chris were together when Des became the Knight, in my opinion. That's what Chris feels accountable for. But that idea doesn't quite make sense without Chris having been involved directly. They were involved directly, because while the darkness of Des's dreams is as strong as can be, the pure dark that inhabits Chris's mind is something we have had hidden from us. Their violent urges, but also their immense creativity hidden in the trees. Why does Des need this power? Well, as Pizza Pants tells us, Chris is actually able to realize their talents. They have the artistic dedication. They have this drive that those around them don't have, and Des is specifically noted not to have. If you combine the known teenage edginess of Des with the hopelessness of nightmares, and then imbue it with Chris's intrusive violent thoughts as well as their creativity as fully realized, suddenly it actually makes sense why the Knight's Dark Worlds have characters Noelle and Chris made while also having things that are clearly Des signaling. The Knight was created from the will of Des, from Des's nightmares, but also from another darkness, the darkness that brings forth creation from the troubled mind that always has been Chris. Chris's mind can be defined like this: the point where dark matter, as the dark worlds, are made up of and defined by, and nightmares, as the Knight's blade and armor are created from. The point where these two intersect is Chris's dark mind. And so here we have the night, and here we have the dark night, the most powerful warrior in the galaxy, and the mirror created to defeat them and keep the darkness of their mind hidden. By the light of day, one could be mistaken for the other, and yet the essence at the core of one is taken directly from nightmares, as distant as can be from the mind of the other, and as powerful as one could expect from such a chimerical joining of the darkest of minds. Or hey, maybe I'm totally overthinking it and it's just that the night has some surface level visual and thematic similarities to Nightmare from Kirby's Adventure. It could be that, right? Either way, if you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate if you liked, subscribed, hyped the video, joined my channel, and commented with your amazing thoughts, which I'm sure you have. I promise to respond to every single comment on this video because I'm super duper interested to discuss my ideas with Kirby fans and Deltarune fans and all of you who happen to just click on the video despite being fans of neither. You know, I'm just really excited about this and I'm really proud of it. And thank you so much for supporting me. And go watch Bucket Theory, and Rouse is also a dog, by the way. And I'll see you in the next one. Subsection E, Deltarune is Kirby Mass Attack. In Kirby Mass Attack, to guide Kirby around, we control this generic star symbol, and I think it calls it Kirby's soul. In Kirby's Dreamland 3, heart stars are a thing, so basically stars and hearts are the same thing, and the soul in Deltarune is the same soul as in Kirby Ass Attack. Also, hey, I don't really know where to put this, but while getting footage, I noticed that Kirby's Adventure literally says Lost Dreams. Yeah, I don't know if this is really relevant since it totally doesn't line up with Deltarune at all, but it's pretty interesting. So yeah, there's that too.